Hi, everyone. It's Tuesday, June 24th, 2025. This is Talkback, and I see on my co-screen is our special guest for today, Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysiewicz, who we often have on to help us navigate what's happening in this crazy world we are living in, municipally, statewide, nationwide, worldwide. So,
Right.
hi, Susan. Good to see you today.
Thank you for having me, Sheila. Nice to see you. And the Capitol is cool, and hopefully the Cape is cool.
All right, so should we talk for 1 minute about the extraordinary heat that may be affecting some of our residents in Connecticut? And of
Yes.
course, that leads to our energy sources and our high prices. Just speak a moment about that for us.
Well, we are in the midst of a heat wave, several days of high 90s, if not close to 100-degree weather. And so, in anticipation of that, the governor and I have issued a warm weather protocol so that if people need to go to a cooling center, they can. To find out which is nearest to them, people can call 211, and there are 126 cooling centers around the state so that people can uh, get a cold drink of water, cool off, get out of the heat, especially during midday and when it's really warm.
Okay, great. I hope everyone can heed those warnings and try to stay cool as best as we can, and hope there are no casualties, nobody gets hurt today. Uh, let's turn to the budget. The legislature just passed the governor's budget, and tell us what some of the highlights were. I know that you want to talk about some of the educational advancements in that
Uh,
budget.
Yes, absolutely. So we passed a $55.8 billion 2-year budget that is our seventh balanced budget. And it is a budget that focuses on um, increasing aid to education. So we've increased K through 12 education aid. We've also focused on increasing aid to special education because so many towns are struggling with greater special education costs. So there's an additional $70 million in our budget for special education this year. Um, but the biggest thing that we are very proud of is a $220 million increase in funding for an early childhood foundation, which would create by 2030 16,000 new early childhood education spots for 3 and 4 year olds, and that funding would allow families that make less than $100,000 a year to have free early childhood education for their kids. And this could be transformational for families because many families, especially if they have more than one child, can be spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a week for child care. And here's the other reason why this is so impactful and transformational. All the research shows that if you have a child who goes to a high quality early childhood education program like a Head Start program, they are 60% less likely to have to go into a special education program.
Yeah.
So, this is funding to make sure kids get off to the best start, but it's also a really good way to prevent ballooning special education costs.
And what is the focus on the ages? From at what age is a child eligible for this program?
So there's a whole range of them, and the focus is for 3 and 4 year olds.
Okay, great. And what relationship does this have at all to the Head Start program, which I know some of us are thinking may be somewhat in jeopardy depending on what the national budget's going to be?
Yes, yes. So, and we should be concerned about Head Start programs which receive federal funding. There are about 5,000 Head Start spots in our state of Connecticut, but the state has a myriad of other programs. Many of them are based in public schools. Some are private centers. And one of the things this Early Childhood Education Foundation would do is would have the establishment of a website so that you could type in your address, where you live, and the ages of your children to find out what would be available, especially depending on your income level. Because I mentioned that a lot of these spots would be free for people who make less than $100,000 a year. And then if you make a little bit more than that, then those spots are available on a sliding scale. So you'd never spend more than 7% of your income.
And what about transportation issues? Are these centers going to be available within the range of people that need it, and how are they going to get
So
there?
there may be some transportation available depending on if there's a public school program or a Head Start program. And a lot of them are community based, so they're within, walking distance in neighborhoods as well. But that is going to be the focus of the website, so that families would know what are the different programs that are available to them depending on where they live. And we are building out capacity because during COVID, we lost a lot of early childhood spots because a lot of home-based or private centers went out of business. And people decided, women are usually run these home-based care centers. And a lot of those women decided to do other things. So we have been building this out. And a couple of things I think that will help the educators who work at these centers will be paid more, which I think is really important. A lot of the educators are women, and it's been very hard to fill these spots. So we are doing our best with this Early Childhood Foundation funding. Hopefully we will keep building on the $220 million because future surpluses could be applied to this, and only a small percentage of the funding will be spent each year, so that it will build up money as time goes on, which I think is critical because there's always going to be a need for high quality early childhood education. So this was a big win for education funding in our budget this year.
So just two more questions on it. When will the program get started? Is it October, or when does it go into effect? And about how many children do you think could be impacted by this program?
So 16,000 by 2030. So there's a ramp up period from when the bill goes into effect and 2030. So we're talking about over the next 5 to 6 years. There will be 16,000 free spaces.
Okay. Anything else in the budget that's a highlight for you? I'm wondering about some of the infrastructure programs that got started in the last administration with the infrastructure bill. Connecticut must be taking advantage of some of that, right?
Yes. So good news, and this is in your area. So the Gold Star Bridge, we received from the federal government $125 million to the state for repairs on that. And that happened after President Trump was sworn into office, and our commissioner, Garrett Ucalito, who oversees all of our transportation projects, believes that the Trump administration is going to continue to invest in road and bridge repair and infrastructure with respect to our roads, and that the $1 billion in projects that we have in the pipeline to be funded by the federal government are not in jeopardy. Good. That's the good news. So the good news is the Trump administration appears to believe that we should continue to invest in infrastructure. The Biden administration believe that. And so those projects will keep going. And one that you will see actually is in East Lyme, as you're on I-95, right? And there's a lot of construction. That's an
Yeah.
example of one of the projects that is in the hopper. Another one that you would see is in Meriden, in the Meriden-Wallingford area, where 691, 15, and 91 meet. That's another one of the big projects that is in the works. I did want to mention some tax relief because I think this is important for families. So the income tax reduction, that the income tax cut that we had in our last budget continues to this budget. So the tax credits that the tax cuts for 1.1 million taxpayers, those continue. So for families that make $300,000 or less, those tax cuts continue, and that's really important. That was important to the governor and I to continue those. And there was a lot of talk about a child tax credit at the state level. There were legislators who wanted that. We had it at the federal level during COVID. And what we ended up with was an additional $250 increase in the earned income tax credit for low-income households. In other words, families who are low income, they're working, but if they had children, there was an extra $250 for those households with kids. So I think that was important. I do want to say that we have a $4 billion rainy day fund, which is good because even though we passed this budget, the federal government is in the process of putting together a federal budget, and we're really concerned about potential cuts to Medicaid. That's, potentially catastrophic for our state because we have 900,000 people in our state that are on Medicaid. Those are children, those are pregnant moms, those are people with disabilities, those are folks who are older or veterans. And that's what the governor and I worry about. We are worried about potential cuts to Medicaid. And there's a debate going on now in Congress and the Senate about which Medicaid groups to cut. And we don't know what the ultimate decision will be on that, but that's sort of what will probably require us to come back into special session in September, most likely, to deal with any impending federal cuts.
Yeah, I know that they're talking about putting in a work requirement, a much more stringent work requirement for people on Medicaid, but the economists say that that's not going to make a big dent, and they're going to try to cut further. So we have to stay tuned for all of that.
We do. And if you have a work requirement, then the question is, well, how do you administer that?
Right.
And there's a debate within Congress and the Senate. I think the Senate right now, Senate Republicans want to cut more. So we're going to have to see how all of that plays out because I don't think anyone is on the same page on either side of the aisle about how much to cut.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get to there's so many issues percolating up in our world today in our country. But one of the things that we have to discuss is today's anniversary. And I've been around a while and you've been in political life for many years. And I don't know about you, but I always thought, yes, our country has its faults, but every generation we seem to make up for that by passing legislation, by having the Supreme Court decisions that expand our rights, that tell us under the Constitution, more of us are free to have freedoms and liberties in this country. And for the first time in my long life, I'm thinking, wow, for the first time, we're not moving up that ladder of freedom.
We're
going back.
slipping down.
We're slipping down. Do you feel that too?
Oh, absolutely. And the governor and I actually spoke about this very issue today because today is the third anniversary of the Dobbs decision. And in the Dobbs case, you had a reversal of the Roe versus Wade decision giving women reproductive freedom to decide what to do with their own bodies. And that rolled back 50 years of settled law. You and I are both lawyers, and that is terribly shocking and concerning. The good news for people in Connecticut, we have a Roe versus Wade statute in our state law. It's been there since the early 90s, so abortion is still safe and legal and protected in Connecticut. But what I talked about at the press conference was the fact that the Trump administration is trying to take a backdoor approach to blocking abortion in other ways. Here's why I say that. For example, they are trying to take away approval, FDA approval of an abortion drug called mifepristone. Right now, women in Connecticut, 2/3 of them who have abortions not through surgery, but through this mifepristone drug, which has been used safely across the globe by millions of women over the course of several decades. And the Trump administration is trying to get the FDA to take back its approval. And the Trump administration is also creating a backdoor abortion ban by defunding Planned Parenthood clinics across the country. So there are about 200 Planned Parenthood clinics across America that will close their doors. And so that means that women in vulnerable communities, people who rely on Planned Parenthood, and right now our Planned Parenthood takes care of 42,000 people in our state. That's Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. And our Planned Parenthood provides health care much beyond abortion care. That's only a tiny percentage of what they do. They do breast cancer screenings. They do cervical cancer screenings. They provide birth control and so much other basic health care, prenatal care. And so that's why by defunding Planned Parenthood, and they've already defunded our Southern New England Planned Parenthood by $2 million. Fortunately, they're still up and running because our state has provided more funding to compensate for the federal cuts. But more is coming, and that will take away the opportunity for a lot of women to get access to basic care. There's also an abortion ban backdoor tactic that's occurring with respect to EMTALA. EMTALA was a federal regulation that the Biden administration had in place. So if you were a pregnant woman and you had an emergency during your pregnancy and you go to your nearest hospital, that hospital was obligated to treat you to make sure that you were taken care of in that healthcare emergency. And now that is taken away. So literally there are women who may die because that access to emergency care didn't happen. Here in Connecticut, we passed a Connecticut version of EMTALA so that if you're having a miscarriage, something's happening that is causing a pregnancy emergency, and you go to a hospital, and if an abortion is needed, they must provide it, no matter what. And I think that's really important. And the reason I highlight these things is that we are constantly in Connecticut expanding access to health care and expanding access through allowing pharmacists to prescribe birth control and abortion drugs, because so many people live within just a few miles of a pharmacy, and pharmacists in 40 other states in addition to ours, have been providing that. So we're expanding access at a time when the federal government is not only taking away the right, but ultimately denying the access that does exist by doing other things, by
Right.
defunding programs and
Right.
reversing regulations.
Yeah, so couple of points on that. So many people are unaware, as you correctly said, that Planned Parenthood is very small percentage that they do is abortion. Much of it is health care for women and birth control. If we had more of that, there would be fewer abortions. I mean, I don't get that they don't see that, but the media has the drumbeat that Planned Parenthood is an abortion mill, which is not true at all. The other point is we have the Supreme Court said that abortion is not a right. However, the states are free to do what they wish. And the president has also said that many times. However, there are people who believe that the Congress will love to have an abortion ban. What happens when there's a national law? What happens to the Connecticut law that safeguards abortion when a national law is passed?
So I would argue, that states can decide how to interpret their own laws and their own state constitution. And actually, I'm glad you brought this point up because it also is something that we've considered in the state legislature this session. It didn't make it through the whole process, but there was a Roe constitutional amendment, if you will. There was a move to change the Equal Protection Clause of our state constitution to cover reproductive care, including abortion, but also including prenatal care, maternal, post-maternal care, all of that spectrum, but also gender expression and gender affirming care. And that initiative, which we would have liked to put on the ballot for voters to decide, did not get through the legislative process. And so I would feel more comfortable personally that abortion rights were protected if we had it in our state constitution, because every state's constitution is different. And the voters in our state would have the opportunity to weigh in by voting. And I will just point out that as we've watched these different abortion bans that at least 13 states have enacted, there have been other states that have had ballot initiatives on choice. And in every one of those instances, when the voters have the chance to choose, they choose reproductive choice.
Right.
They choose it. And so I think that I don't see how a federal court could overturn something if we actually had a state constitutional provision.
Okay, well, let's hope it doesn't ever, we don't have to have that challenge. The other question is the relationship between Connecticut and other states that have good laws protecting reproductive freedoms and other states that don't have that have bans and have women who need help to go to other states. What does Connecticut do when someone from another state who might be under a law that criminalizes her conduct or criminalizes the conduct of the doctor? What can Connecticut do in those instances?
So Connecticut has stepped up with the Reproductive Freedom Defense Act that was passed a few years ago, and that it actually got passed before the Dobbs case was decided, which is fortunate. But that says that if a woman is living in one of those 13 states where abortion is banned, or a woman is living in a state where abortion is severely restricted, she can come to Connecticut and get care. And Planned Parenthood has told us, and there was a representative, Gretchen Raffa from Planned Parenthood of Southern New England, who said today that they are seeing an increase in the number of people coming to Connecticut from out of state. So we have a law that protects those women while they're here from prosecution, but also if they're coming from another state where it's illegal, but also protects the providers that give the care. And I think that's really important because, there are some states that have these long arm statutes that purport to try to criminalize getting an abortion, even if you get it in another state.
Right. Okay. Um, Talking about women, how about young women and girls? I know that you have many initiatives trying to empower young women. We need more women in the professions, in government. What's going on in Connecticut in regard to that?
Well, that is literally the charge of the Governor's Council on Women and Girls that I lead in our state. And the focus is how we can uplift women and girls. And to me, one of the biggest disparities is disparities in pay. White women make 84 cents on a dollar to what a white man makes. It's 59 cents for Black women, and it is a shocking 48 cents for Latinas.
Wow.
And right. So, one of the things that we do on our council is we try to encourage girls and young women to study STEM fields because those are the highest paying jobs. Jobs in engineering, science, technology, mathematics, statistics, computer science. And so we host a Lieutenant Governor's Computing Challenge for third grade students, both girls and boys, all the way up through 12th grade. And we've had close to 1,000 kids participate in that of all grade levels. And they either participate individually or with a group of students because 99% of careers involve using a computer, whether it's precision manufacturing, engineering, health related and medical fields. And we want more girls and young women to start thinking about going into the STEM fields because a lot of our 90,000 jobs that are open now, they're in precision manufacturing, they're in statistics and insurance, and they're in engineering. We really need engineers. And so we want girls and young women to be getting involved in these very good subjects so that they will be able to get the highest paying jobs. And so that's been a focus of our council for the past 6 years because the more women engineers and precision manufacturers, the more women who are in jobs that have incomes, exceeding $100,000 plus. And so that's what we're focused on.
So are we measuring? Do we have tools to measure whether or not the income levels are going up with these jobs?
So we've made some progress. I think that about 25%, a couple of years ago, it was about 25% of the STEM jobs were held by women. It's inching up closer to 30%, but I'd like to see 50-50, because then we would see that disparity be reduced. Because right now you have a lot of women in what I call pink collar jobs that are traditionally women jobs. So nursing, teaching, early childhood education, CNAs, health
Right.
aid. These are positions traditionally held by women. And so therefore, when you have a lot of women in a job, hospitality is another one, you see them paid less than men.
Right. So we have to turn that around, and we have
Right.
to raise the consciousness of our young girls to go into these new
Right.
fields.
So to that point, Sheila, we've been doing leadership panels to try to get women interested. So we did a women in manufacturing panel. We've done a women in construction and building trades
Mm, right.
because the construction trades are STEM jobs. We are doing one actually tomorrow on women in transportation. And so I think these are really important fields for women to get into, girls and young women to be studying and to get into, because their incomes will literally shoot right up and be in and be higher than in some of the other professions that I mentioned. You know, starting salary of a teacher or nurse versus starting salary of an engineer or even a precision manufacturing.
Right.
Uh,
Okay. All right. Well, we have to address some of the issues that are going on in our country today. So many of us are thinking that our democracy, in some ways, is being threatened, whether it's our civil liberties, our press freedoms, our law firms are having issues, universities are having issues, the issue of immigration. And so I want you to address that. But I guess I would like to know about Connecticut and the idea of being a sanctuary state or sanctuary city. Many people are not aware about what that means and how it works.
right. And I don't know where anybody got that designation, because nowhere in state statute or state law does it say Connecticut is a sanctuary state. And I'm certainly, I couldn't tell you of any sanctuary cities. Are we a state where we welcome people who are new to this country? Yes, we are. You know, 1 in 10 people in our state comes from somewhere else. And unless you are an indigenous tribal member, right, you have likely come from somewhere else. And the only question is, like, what generation in your family came here as a new American? And so there is no legal basis for we're a sanctuary state. Have we seen ICE coming in and deporting people, taking people? Yes, absolutely. You know, and that's why we have the Trust Act in Connecticut. It was enacted in 2019 and strengthened this year. The governor just signed the new strengthening provisions to it. But basically, that says is that state and local law enforcement will not assist ICE unless there is someone that's convicted of a Class A or B felony, right? Obviously, our state police and our local police are busy because they want to be keeping those with criminal backgrounds off the street. So we want our law enforcement to focus on that and not assisting ICE when our state doesn't have a public safety interest in that.
So if so, I know that people are afraid now. There's a tremendous fear, and people who are afraid may not be willing to be cooperative with the police and law enforcement. That becomes an issue, right? That's
Right.
one of the issues.
And I also think that one of the issues, and this is what troubles the governor and I the most, is when people are afraid. Because, like, let's take Meriden. A week or two ago, a young man who was about to graduate, he was just a few days away from graduating a high school in Meriden, was taken along with his dad, right? And what we worry about is, as people watch this, do they stop sending their kids to school?
Yeah.
So we do want people, families with kids, to know that their kids are safe in school, right? That their kids should go to school. You should send your kids to school. Now, I realize we're in summer vacation, but if your kids are going to summer programs, please, at public schools, keep sending them. Those are safe places.
Right. And don't we want to believe that in our country people have due process rights, that even if they are candidates to be deported, they get to have some tribunal
Yeah,
making that determination? They
yeah,
can't just be taken off the streets and squired away to
yeah.
some other country.
But
Although the Supreme Court is allowing that for a time, which is unbelievable. And I'm sure we can have another program on all the Supreme Court decisions that are bad for our democracy today, but that's another subject, right?
well, and people should know there are so many rights. You mentioned due process. Here's another one: voting rights. Right, the right to vote, um, which women got in 1920. So 120 something years ago. And here we are, where the president is introducing the SAVE Act, which would require that you bring a passport or a birth certificate to show you are a citizen. But here's the problem with that: only 40% of Americans have a passport. And think of all the millions of women out there who have a different name on their birth certificate than on their driver's license because they've taken their husband's married name. And that is a significant concern of mine as somebody who was the former Secretary of the State, that millions of women will be disenfranchised if that were to pass.
Well, it seems to me the goal is to take people off the rolls so fewer people will vote, because for some reason the other side believes that the fewer Democrats vote, the better it is for them. I guess there's a certain truth to that, right?
Well, and also, look, women from both parties have made the decision as to who becomes president, because more women vote in national elections
Yeah.
than men. And so I see this issue of the SAVE Act as a way to disenfranchise women.
Right.
And we know that in every election for the past several decades, the issue of reproductive freedom has been on the ballot. And, will be next year for our state elections and in our next federal election. And so I think that's why we saw all these issues, Sheila, that you are raising, from due process to reproductive freedom to voting rights. These rights were discussed as we had the No King's Day, right? There were all of these protests. I went to the one right here at the Capitol, and there were, oh my goodness, more than 10,000 people there. And people were talking about immigrants' rights. People were talking about voting rights, even the right to peacefully protest, because as we were doing this, Trump had taken control of the National Guard in California and was sending federal troops to sending soldiers to United States military soldiers to California. So basic rights like the right to assemble and to peacefully protest, I think, are a very important part of our public discussion. And I believe that in order to protect rights, you have to exercise them. And so
Right.
that's what the No King's Day was all about. It didn't matter where you were, whether you were in New London or the Guilford Green or New Haven or Hartford or Middletown or Manchester. There were even huge protests attracting hundreds of people in some of the small towns like Kent and Warren and other places. It was just
Right.
remarkable how people came out.
Right. So that's one citizen action. So I want to end by you talking about that. What can we do? I think we have to keep up our courage, because very much the administration in Washington would like there to be some, perhaps some unruly marches so they could maybe bring in the National Guard. And we have to be very careful to not allow them to put that trick on us, right? And what can we do in Connecticut? We're having the municipal elections coming up
Yeah,
in November. We have a very poor turnout for those? How can we get people more engaged to protect
Well,
all our rights?
this is you are speaking to the choir. I would always say to people that the level of government that affects your life the most is at the local level, because it's local leaders, your council members, your board of selectmen that decide the level of your property taxes, the quality of your children's education, your local roads that you drive on. So um, vote at the local level, run for office, work for candidates that you believe in. You don't have to set foot outside your town to help at the town level. Volunteer to be on a board or a commission. Your mayor or your first selectman would be so happy if you volunteered to be on the park and rec board, or a land use board, or the library board, depending on your town. And sometimes you have to run for those positions, but that's a way to help right in your own community. And I also tell people, if you have a cause that you believe in, or an issue that speaks to you, if it's the environment, join the Sierra Club. If it's reproductive freedom, volunteer at Planned Parenthood. Or if hunger is in our state as an issue for you, volunteer at a food pantry. Make donations to nonprofit organizations like IRIS, the Immigrant and Refugee Resettlement group that operates out of New Haven. There's so many great organizations that are helping people in need right now. LGBTQ plus community members are under attack, particularly trans youth. So, if there's an organization in your community that you can volunteer with, please do that, because that's another way that you can push back on what's happening.
Okay. All right, great. We've just scratched the surface, so I want to end with some of your final thoughts about what is on your bucket list for what you would like to envision happening in the future for Connecticut, and what's most on your mind as an American today?
So I would say that my big concern, having worked through the legislative process to get our administration's budget passed for now, is to see what happens with the federal budget and what that means for Connecticut, because it may require that we go back into a special session and perhaps use part of our rainy day fund to fund critical healthcare programs, or other education programs. Hard to know without seeing a final budget, but that's one thing that the governor and I are watching very carefully and getting ready to address. And we've asked all of our state agencies to look at where they receive federal funding and make alternative plans if some of that funding is cut. And the governor and I have said that we are going to stand strong on Connecticut values: reproductive freedom, gun safety. We are going to stand up for labor rights, LGBTQ plus rights, voting rights, and the rights of those who are new to our country. So
Okay, great.
we're not changing. We're going to keep showing leadership, because when we broaden our rights here in Connecticut with state laws or policies, other states follow.
Connecticut is a leader. There's no question about it. And it's always great to have you on. And I hope people take to heart some of your ideas for being an involved citizen. This is the time in our country's history where we need you. We need everyone out there. So thanks so much. Thanks so much, Lieutenant Governor. And we'll see you all next time on Talkback. Bye-bye.
Nice to talk to you.
Yeah.